The word iota has two distinct meanings. As a noun, 1. A tiny or scarcely detectable amount. 2. The ninth letter of the Greek alphabet.
Welcome to Iota for Tuesday, July 26, 2016. I'm Tony Lynn. Iota is a daily news podcast focused on the Internet of Things industry. This is where we talk about all things IoT and the news that goes along with it. Hopefully, this will give you the ability to learn more about this blowing up industry. So let's get started. Rick Merritt of EE Times reports that GreenWaves Technology has produced an IoT chip that contains power equal to many desktop computers. The chip has 8 cores and supports up to 10 megabits per second connection on any IoT network. They're currently seeking $3 million to financing to mass produce the chip. The device is not intended to run Linux, but it could run a possible custom iOS, or not iOS, a custom OS in a bare metal configuration. They also plan to offer an Arduino shield to assist in software development. Their thoughts behind this is that right now most IoT devices are low power, low bandwidth, and if they can start packing in more power to the devices themselves, they'll be able to get a lot more, utility and functionality in these devices as they go outside. There's a little bit of an issue from the standpoint of just because you have more power doesn't necessarily mean that it gets to do what you need it to do. And one of the attractiveness of IoT is the fact that it's inobtrusive or unobtrusive, and it's able to actually deliver a lot of data in a very small package and without a lot of power. I'd be curious to see how this works out, but let's find out. The next story of the day is the organ tracker, which is a battery-operated GPS device placed inside of an organ donor package that helps track the location of the donated organ wherever it goes. It monitors its position, determines if the package has received a shock by excessive acceleration or deceleration, and the barometric pressure of the package. Basically, the packages should be inside of the cargo, not the cargo cabin, but inside where people are, preferably the pilot, but maybe the crew, and not be in the cargo hold. If it is, then the organ has a potential to be damaged, and no one wants that. Continuing on, Ericsson is expecting a flood of cellular IoT devices by 2018. Joe McKendrick reports in rtinsights.com that Ericsson expects the number of non-mobile phone cellular usage to exceed cell phone usage by 2018. I don't know that this is true. I think this probably was done prior to this sudden influx of new data networks, such as the Things Network or Zigbee or any of these others, where yes, low power LTE is a viable solution for a lot of these devices, but nowadays you're coming up with additional possibilities, and the additional possibilities that, one, use less power, and two, don't use cellular. And I'm curious to see if this really, does this really happen? I think in some cases, these new mobile platforms are going to take off more than what they think it's going to take off. So today's a light news day. There was only the 3 main stories. There were a few others that just didn't catch my attention. So I thought that maybe what I might do today is talk a little bit about what actually makes up an IoT platform. I think in a lot of cases, those that are just starting to get into the know are overwhelmed by the amount of data that might exist. There's a platform, and then there's APIs, and then there's the devices themselves, and what devices do you use, and how does all this work? And I think in some cases that, it becomes very hard to really just figure out what's going on. So let me pull up on my screen here real quick. I'm going to pull up what would effectively be our pick of the day, is a way to actually figure out what IoT platforms are all about. So a lot of the platforms themselves can be broken down into, there's the connectivity between the device and whatever the database might be. And a lot of manufacturers or a lot of providers out there kind of mix the two up, so that, there's a little bit of the apples versus oranges argument that, for instance, you got AWS IoT or Azure IoT, but they don't necessarily provide all the end-to-end solutions. They're not necessarily the connection between the device and to get to AWS. So the IoT Analytics back in January actually produced this article, which I think is a very good one. As we talk about IoT platforms, there's really 4 things that kind of go along with it, although we'll dive into it a little bit deeper here in a second, that there's actually 8 parts to any decent platform. But there's, first and foremost, is the connectivity between the device and the data storage, if you will. Then there's the back end, the infrastructure as a service side. Now, this is where AWS and Azure come in, is that they're providing the back end functionality for this. Now, IoT can use HTTP as a transport, but there's another transport out there, and for the life of me right now, I can't remember what it is, but it's basically it has its own ability to transmit data without actually going over the same same protocols, if you will. Then there's the hardware specific platforms where someone who has built a device such as a Raspberry Pi or an Arduino, and they've basically built its own little ecosystem to talk to each other. And that's that's part of the solution, but it's not the full solution. And then of course there's consumer enterprise software extension, so that as these things are built out. A great example of this is GE's what is it, the Predix or the Predictix software that actually kind of does a lot of the heavy lifting on the back end. So let's look in and see what this really means, so that if you're really out there and you're trying to determine, okay, now I want to get my company into this, or I want to do something on the developer side of the house, and I want to be involved in this, and I don't really know how to get started. You need to understand that the devices are useless unless, 1, it collects data, and then 2, you can do something with the data. And even when you do something with the data, then you still got to display the data to some some human or to some process that allows for decision making. So this article actually outlines that there's really 8 components to a good quality modern IoT platform architecture. First and foremost, there's the connectivity at the bottom. So you've got to be able to talk back and forth. You have to be able to device manage the devices. You have to be able to process the data. You have to be able to visualize the data, which includes analytics, and then plus some additional tools that you might come along with. And then there's the external interfaces. All these things were what I just said, but maybe in a more simplified fashion. And then of course you got the database that connects all the way across. So anytime you decide to take on a project, a deployment of this, you need to make sure that all these things are kind of thought through. I have seen in a couple of occasions where, particularly in a startup environment, where they think, or the founders seem to think that all they really need is a device that can collect data, and then the rest of it kind of magically happens. And that's not really true. If in some cases all you're doing is providing that construct, and then someone else is going to be consuming the data, that's fine. But you do have to know that there's a full round trip that has to be taken care of. Outside of that, right now, if you look at, there are different types of IoT platforms. Again, not all of these provide all of those 8 functionalities or 8 components. But you certainly need to take a look and see. My advice to you is that if you decide to go down this path, find someone like myself, or someone who is more of a generalist that can tell you what the end-to-end should be, and then you can come in and decide on the bits and pieces that you need. And the one thing that none of this talks about are how do you get to the device itself, whether you buy something off the shelf or whether you have something built. But I would I would suggest you go read this article in more detail. It's got some real good data on what this world entails, and I think that as you learn, as we all learn, how to best make effective use of all of this data and all of this new technology, I think we have some real insights and some real creativity to actually solve some of the world's problems. Outside of that, I hope to see you get back here tomorrow, and that's our show for today. Have a good day.